To continue with what we've been discussing for the past couple weeks, what we're going to get into today is how to actually set up paper space. And hopefully now what we'll start to see is everything that we've been doing to this point start to come together. So basically, paper space is the space where we set up our drawings so that they can be a certain scale. So as we've been working in model space, everything has been full scale, and paper space is where we actually set up our drawings in order to be a 1/4 inch, 3/8 of an inch, 1/8 of an inch, so on and so forth. And that's why we draw everything to full scale in model space, and we don't have to scale it in model space like we would working with the drafting table. So as we know, this is model space. Okay, we're familiar with this space already. And then if you haven't, if you click on these layout tabs, okay, you'll see that every file comes with these 2 layout tabs. If I click on that, what this is this is paper space, okay? And basically what this is this is simply a graphic, okay, of a piece of paper. This, when we start to print, doesn't mean anything, okay? We can change the size of it. So if we want to change the size of this, if I right-click on my Layout 1 tab, you'll see that I have all these extra options for laying out this sheet, and basically all these options that come with paper space, okay? And that with those options we can move or copy, okay, these sheets around. We can rename it, we can delete it. You can always delete sheets out of your paper space, but we always have to have at least one, okay? So that's the one caveat with that. And then what we can do is we can actually go into our page setup manager, and we can set up a specific layout in order to assign this to certain sheets. So we might have a few layouts in here, okay, and we might apply them to different sheets. But if you want to change your sheet, okay, you can go into this page setup manager, you can go into modify, and you'll see that what essentially pops up is your print dialog. So for example, if I'm working with 11 by 17, I can go into this page setup manager. I can change my paper size to 11 by 17, okay, depending upon my printer that I print to. Change that to tabloid, okay, landscape, all that's good, hit OK, and now you'll see that when I close that,
has been updated.
My sheet, okay, the size changes to 11 by 17. Now, as I said, this really doesn't matter. Okay, basically after we do our first print, that's when the sheet should change. Okay, so it might just change on its own. So that's why, you know, I always tell people don't get too hung up on this sheet graphic. Okay, because really it doesn't, you know, you could have something floating way over here and you can still print it normally and it turns out fine. Okay, when we go to insert our title block, okay, into this space, it does not matter if it's floating exactly on there. Okay, so just keep that one in mind. Now what also pops up is essentially this box, and if we click on that, that's what's called, you'll see that it is a rectangle. It does select. I can change the size of it, and what this is this is a viewport, okay, and this is the window that essentially will scale our drawing, okay, and how it does that is that you see this gridded space below. Okay, that's model space. So what it does is it essentially cuts a hole in this sheet, and then what it does is it zooms in and zooms out in order to assign the scale to the drawing. So this is the view that we need to have, and the viewport that we need to have, and the window that we need to have in order to set up our drawings at certain scales. Okay, so to begin with, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start to set up sheet files. Okay, and essentially sheet files, it's one way of doing it in that the way that we're going to set up our sheets for our drawing set is we're going to have one sheet file, okay, for each sheet that we create in our set. Okay, so we'll have A0, A1, A2, so on and so forth. And what we want to do is with this sheet file, and this is in order to get you more practice with XREFs, is we're going to XREF our plan, okay, our base drawing, which, you know, could be our plan, our modified plan, our elevations, whatever we're working with. We're going to XREF that into model space, and then in paper space we're going to take the title blocks that we created last week, and we're going to XREF those into paper space. Now, as I noted last week, with last week's assignment, okay, we still have to, even though we're X-referencing our title blocks into paper space, we still have to draw those in model space, and that's why we have a separate title block file, and that's why we draw our title blocks in model space, because when you go to XREF, you can only XREF information in model space, period. Okay? A lot of people say, well, you know, my title block is XREF'd into paper space, why can't, you know, if I go to XREF that into another file, why doesn't my paper space information come with? And that's the reason. Only objects in model space are XREF. Now what we're going to do is we're going to start to set up our sheets in paper space. And these are the sheets that are going to make up our final drawing set in the end for the rest of the semester that we're going to be working on. Now in the professional world, there's two ways of doing this. Okay, one is to have all of your information in model space and to create these layout tabs as each one of your sheets. Okay, that has its pluses and minuses. Okay, its plus is that it keeps everything in one file. The minus is that you cannot have multiple people working on an Autocad file when it's open. Okay, so if you've run into that somehow, or you will run into it somehow with the read-only files, that's essentially what happens. Okay, that locks you out of that file. Okay, and essentially the way to get around it is to do a save as, but you can never make changes to a read-only file and then save them and update the file currently. Now, you know, the bad thing about that is that if you have all of this information, okay, all these objects in model space, what happens is that the file tends to get bogged down. Okay, so the two, you know, minuses to it is that only one person can work in it at a time. Okay, which is probably not going to be how you'll work in a professional world. Maybe, okay, but most likely if it's a bigger firm, maybe not. Okay, and then the other way, the other minus for it is that the more information you have, it's going to get bogged down and it's get slower. So what happens is that a lot of firms, what they do is they actually take their drawings and they XREF the drawing into model space, they XREF the title block into paper space, and what they do is they set up what's called a sheet set. Okay, so for that, what we need to have is we need to have our title block, okay, that we created last week. We need our drawings, our original drawings, and these are what I refer to as the base plan. Okay, it can be the original plan, it can be the modified plan, it could be elevations even. Okay, those are essentially what's called base drawings, and you should see that terminology in the professional realm, you know, as you start to work with this. So I'm going to exit out of that and go back into my file. And basically, you know, this was opened up from AutoCAD's template. I changed the units to architectural, and what we're going to do is we're going to save this as our first sheet. So I'm going to save this as sheet A1. So I'm going to go into my AutoCAD class folder and I'm going to save this as A1 and hit save. Okay, so essentially what this is this is my sheet file, and the way that we're going to set it up is in model space. I'm going to XREF. Okay, we'll first start off with our original plan. So I'm going to attach my drawing, and I'm going to find my, oops, not that, my original plan. Okay, so you should have already gone through this process last week. So I'm going to hit OK. I'm going to click for the insertion point, and I'm just going to do a zoom and extents, because again, if we attach it and we don't see it, that just means our base point, okay, is way off in the distance. So if I do a zoom extents, a Z enter for zoom, an E enter for extents, I should see my plan here for me. Okay, and again, if I click on it, that's an XREF. Now what I want to do is I want to go into paper space and I want to attach my title block there. So if I click on my layout 1 tab and get into paper space, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go again into my XREF manager, and I'm going to attach my title block in that space. So I'm going to click on open, hit OK, and essentially insert this into my paper space. Now, as I said, it really doesn't matter where it is. Okay, I can have it floating over here. Because what happens is when I go to print it, you know, if I do window or extents, I typically don't do layout and display as much. If I do windows and extents, if I do extents, if that's the only extents of the file, the only objects that are in the extents of the file, then it will print to the border of it. Okay, same for Windows, is that I can click on one endpoint and another, and it doesn't matter where anything else is as long as I define that window. I can print in that area. But a lot of people like to move this and just stick it in the corner there for graphics sake.